Hello, and thanks for joining me on the trail. Recently, I posted in Tom's on the Trail what my favorite cycling books were. I became an avid reader about 4 years ago, and I used the Goodreads app to track what I've read. And according to Goodreads this morning, it says that I read 45 bicycle and cycling books. I went through those books and I found 5 that I thought stood out above the others. And you'll find that on Tom on the Trails in that article. Anyway, another thing I do when I read is I try to identify a lesson. Every book, I think, shares some knowledge and life lessons. And I like to log those. So I went through my journal at those 45 entries for those books, and I found the one that I want to share today. And that lesson comes from an Irish cyclist, Ian Lacey, and he was cycling the spine of America. In other words, he was started in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and he was cycling to the southernmost point of South America. He was a very conscientious tourist, by the way. One thing he did, he had set the rule that he had to cycle every mile. And there were a few times when he had to perform some extraordinary feats to do that, where for some reason he got off of his tour and had to do a repair or some emergency and get back on. So the story I'm telling you starts in Central America, pretty far south of Central America. And as he's cycling, far ahead, he could see the silhouette of a fully laden bike. And as he approached, sure enough, it was an elderly bicycle tourist. And catching up, he engaged the gentleman in conversation. And the gentleman shared that he had been touring for over 20 years. He had many epic tours of 6 months plus, and it was his life. And at that time, Ian Lacey shared, well, hey, this is what I'm doing, and I'm making sure that I'm cycling every mile. The elderly gentleman thought about that, and this is the response he gave him, which I think is a good lesson. And he said, you know what? I've cycled many years on a bike, on a tour, and I've met a lot of people. And I've met a lot of people with that philosophy that you have. And here's my thought on that. Is your accomplishment based on some arbitrary rule or criteria you set? Or is it based on the thought and the reality that you got from point A to point B? And when you got from A to B, did you see and do what you set out to do? Did you experience what you went out to do? And he said, isn't that what we should be doing? And he then said, I gave these people a title, and he called it the EFI Club. And basically that's every fucking inch club. And he said, think about that. Is that the way you want to define your tour? Farther down in South America, Ian Lacey was faced with a decision where he was not going to cycle every mile. The area that he was in was extremely dangerous to cycle. The weather conditions were very adverse. The road conditions were very crowded and unsafe. And he decided to get in the back of a truck. And at that point, Ian Lacey said, that lesson I learned in South America from that bicycle tourist really was true. And I was indeed putting criteria on my success, on the value and the completion on my tour that is very arbitrary. So I'd kind of like to hear your thoughts on that. And I know some people, it's all about every mile, and some it's all about the experience. So Why don't you share with me what your thoughts are on this? So thanks for joining me on the trail today.